Hey guys, so for this lesson we're going to be talking about subtracting mixed numbers from a whole number. To refresh your memory, our last lesson we looked at when we subtract mixed numbers, what do we have to do when we can't subtract a smaller fraction or a bigger fraction from a smaller fraction. So for the example, 9 and 2, 6 minus 3 and 5, 6. We talked about this when we talked about the steps we have to take when doing subtraction. Remember, we're going to have to stack the numbers with a larger mixed number on top. And then we subtract our fractions first. So we're trying to subtract 2, 6 minus 5, 6. Remember, we decided that we can't do that, right? Because we can't subtract 5 from 2. And we talked about how when we use whole numbers in subtraction, we shift to 10. But when it comes to mixed numbers, instead of shifting a 10, we have to shift a whole. So that means that we have to take one whole from this 9. That becomes an 8. I'm going to give that one whole to this 2, 6. That way I can subtract this fraction from it. But we can't just write the number 1, right? We have to write the whole, or the 1, as a fraction. So that's when I said you have to look at your denominator. The denominator is going to let you know how many pieces there are in the whole. Since our denominator is 6, we know that our whole is going to be 6, 6. So I'm going to give one whole, or 6, 6, to the 2, 6. 2, 6 plus 6, 6 is 8, 6. I created an improper fraction, or an amount greater than a whole. Now I can go ahead and subtract my fractions. 8, 6 minus 5, 6. Remember, we subtract just the numerators. 8 minus 5 is 3. And we keep the denominator the same. So 3, 6. Now we can go ahead and subtract our whole numbers. Well, if you remember, I took a whole from the 9. So now I only have 8 wholes. 8 minus 3 is 5. So that's 5 and 3, 6. Again, this is just a refresher of how you regroup subtracting mixed numbers. So let's look at something different now. I'm going to give you a problem where we're going to try to subtract a mixed number from a whole number. So if I gave you this problem, that's 4 minus 2 and 1/3. Again, you would do the same process when subtracting mixed numbers. You would stack your numbers on top. So we know that 4 would go on top because it's larger than 2 and 1/3. So I'm going to put 4 on top and then put 2 and 1/3 on the bottom. Then I would subtract my fractions. Now, a common mistake that students make is to think, oh, I know what this is. Well, I just subtract 2 from 4, which is 2, and then 1/3 stays the same. So many people would think this is 2 and 1/3. That's not correct. Remember, we have 4 wholes, and we're trying to take 2 and 1/3 from that. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to show you with a picture first of how this would look so you can see it visually. So here we have a model of that. Again, I have this same problem, 4 minus 2 and 1/3. Over here, I have pictures that represent both of these numbers. I have 4 wholes, which you see here, 1, 2, 3, 4. Now notice my holes. How many parts are my holes broken up into? Well, they're broken up into 1, 2, 3 parts, 3 equal parts. Because if you look at our fraction, we're talking about thirds. So anytime we represent a whole number, that whole has to be represented as thirds. So I have 4 wholes, and from that I'm going to subtract 2 and 1/3, which is represented right here. I have 2 wholes and 1/3. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to do my subtraction, but remember, I can't take 1/3 from nothing, right? It just doesn't work. We can't subtract 1/3 from 0. So we're going to do the same thing as we did in our previous lesson. We're just going to shift a whole, but we're going to give that whole to the blank space, or the nothing, 0. So I'm going to come up here, I'm going to take a whole from one of these four, so I'm going to cross out this, and I'm going to give it to the blank spot, or the 0. Well, I'm not going to just say 1. Remember, what does our whole represent if we had to put it in a fraction? Go back to your denominator, we're talking about thirds, so we would know that would be 3/3. 3/3 is the same as 1 whole. Okay, now we have something in our blank spot, right? We shifted a whole. Now we can go ahead and we can subtract this fraction. Well, what is 3/3 minus 1/3? Okay, 3/3 minus 1/3 would be 2/3. Okay, now I can subtract my whole numbers. Remember, I gave a whole away, so I only have 3 up here. 3 minus 2 is 1. I have 1 and 2/3. Again, I'm going to show you this, but without the pictures. We can't take 1/3 from nothing, so I'm going to take a whole. This becomes a 3. I'm going to give that whole to my 0, or my blank spot. Remember, our whole, we have to write it as a fraction. We know our fractions are broken up into thirds, so our whole would be 3/3. I'm going to give that blank spot 3/3. Now I can subtract. 3/3 minus 1/3 is 2/3. Now I can subtract my whole number. 3 minus 2 is 1 2/3. So this is what it would look like visually. So we're going to try this one more time, but this time we're not going to show a picture. Okay. What if I gave you the problem 13 minus 1 and 1/3. Okay, so this is our whole number, and this is a mixed number. Again, you do the same steps when subtracting mixed numbers. You would stack your numbers on top with a larger number going on top. So 13 is larger than 1/3. Put that on top, and underneath it, I'm going to subtract 1 and 1/3. Now, if I was following the same steps as before, I would subtract my fractions first. Well, I have just 1/3. I have nothing up here. I can't subtract 1/3 from nothing. So I have to shift a whole. I'm going to shift a whole from the 13, take a whole from 13. That's going to become a 12. I'm going to give that whole to my blank spot, or my 0. Well, what fraction would a whole represent? Again, we look at our denominator. Again, we're talking about thirds. So it would be 3/3. That's the same as 1 whole. Now I can subtract my fraction. 3/3 minus 1/3 is 2/3. And then I can subtract my wholes. 12 minus 1 is 11. 11 and 2/3. So go ahead and stop this video, rewind it, and look back over it as many times as you need.